feed your head, engage your brain, and enter the mind's eye, an awesome auditorium of audacity and alliteration. I'm your host, DJ BJ Turnov for Stitcher Radio and Z Talk Radio. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. We think of cults as a bizarre, inexplicable, or otherworldly place that only strange people inhabit. Truth be told, it can happen to anyone. Michelle Pfeiffer, Glenn Close, Rose McGowan, Lisa Marie Presley, Julian Assange. Not only are these people famous, but each of them were born and raised in a cult. Cults are quite commonplace, so commonplace that we don't even think about related phrases in our vocabulary. Something as little as a show has a cult following, or something big and insidious like "Don't drink the Kool-Aid," which references that horrific event at Jonestown. Cults are so commonplace that there are dozens across America. Arizona, Colorado, Utah, our neighbors in the north and south, Mexico and Canada have them, and there are hundreds across the globe. Cults aren't new. They've been active for centuries. Today, right now, there are first, second, third, and fourth generation cult members, people who were born into, never seen the outside world, and died in a cult. Most people who encounter cults, they're not going to join, and if they do get swept up into it, they leave at some point. But we know them. We hear these stories. What if you are one of these people whose parents raised you in a cult and you want to leave? What about their stories? In the first of its kind research featured in the book, Escaping Utopia, Growing Up in a Cult, Getting Out and Starting Over, sociologist Janja Lalich and award-winning author Carla McLaren, both of whom themselves are cult survivors, they interviewed 65 people who were born in and grew up in a cult to find out their stories. What's especially interesting about these individuals is that each of them left on their own free will, on their own accord, without any outside help. In the first hour, Janja will discuss her research and stories from these cult survivors. Then in the second hour, Carla McLaren will tell us what life was like for her growing up in a New Age cult. Stay tuned. The Mind's Eye on Z Talk Radio and Stitcher Radio will be right back. Good news, everybody. Not only are we back from commercial, but a Mind's Eye mystery may have been solved recently. Many have wondered why were Easter Island's towering stone statues, the moai, placed where they are across the island. A new study suggests that not only did the moai have ancestral significance, but was actually central to the survival of these people. The author of the studies concluded that the statues were positioned near sources of humanity's most vital resource, fresh water. More info now about the study and Easter Island on our Twitter and Facebook pages, at Mind's Eye Show. Same deal for Instagram, at Mind's Eye Show. Or just go to where it's all under one roof, themindseyemedia.com, themindseyemedia.com. You can follow links on our website to YouTube or Stitcher Radio for all of our free episodes. That's right, all of our episodes are free right now. All you got to do is subscribe. FYI, just got word over the commercial break that Janja Lalich had a bit of a personal matter and had to delay it, so we're just shuffling the interview a bit. We're going to talk to her partner in crime first, Carla McLaren, who is so badass that she was even kicked out of the cult that she was raised in. We'll talk about that experience in the first hour. When we come back, then hopefully Janja will be able to join us in the second. We return in a Mind's Eye moment. We're back on the Mind's Eye, and our next guest, Carla McLaren, is the co-author of Escaping Utopia, Growing Up in a Cult, Getting Out and Starting Over. Carla is also an award-winning author and social science researcher who happened to grow up in a New Age healing cult in the San Francisco Bay Area. Her recent publications include The Art of Empathy, A Complete Guide to the Life's Most Essential Skill, and The Language of Emotions, What Your Feelings Are Trying to Tell You. Carla, truly grateful to have you on the Mind's Eye tonight.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's good to be here.
How did you guys get together for this book?
I was up at Chico. Actually, I was doing an online bachelor's at Chico. At that point, Chico State was doing all the online education for the state university system. I lived down in Monterey, but I was online at Chico. And I was in the bachelor's program as an older person because much of my life was taken up by being in a cult and then, losing my chance to develop at the normal time when people do. So I was getting my bachelor's in my 30s, I think. And a bachelor's is for someone who's 18 years old, and I was bored out of my skull with a lot of these courses. And I went to my professor at the time and I said, "Are you doing anything? Are you working on anything? Do you need a writer? Just help me here because I'm dying." And my professor, Tony Waters, we wrote a book together on murder. And how the definition of murder changed over the decades. It's fascinating. And he heard about my story and he identified what I had gone through as a cult experience. And he said, "You have to talk to Janja." So I talked to Janja and I said, "Is there anything you're working on?" So we started working together and collaborating. And I helped her rewrite a book of hers on a severe deadline, and she was teaching full time and couldn't do it, so I helped her with that, and then our collaboration went from there.
You helped Yanya carve out the book, and a lot of the book, as we discussed in the first hour, is comprised of portions and stories from about 65 or so participants, who of cult survivors. And you didn't actually conduct any of the actual
No.
interviews, but you had to read about all these experiences. And as a cult survivor yourself, I don't know if you were still doing stuff with cult, still looking into and researching. But why did you decide to jump headfirst really back into it?
I really feel that it's such an important thing. And as we were writing it in 2015 and 2016 and watched what was happening around the world, but specifically in the United States, with so much cultic energy happening around the presidential election season, I thought this is really important for people to understand not only that cults exist and how you can tell if something is a cult or is a normal group, but also that you can get out. You can get out. Even if you were born there and you didn't know anything else, you can get out and you can get free. And I thought, for me, this was a really important book, for 1,000 reasons. But for me, politically, it was as well, because there's so many people trapped in whatever ideology they have right now, that it's really important to have as many stories as are humanly possible to tell about people getting out of these kinds of mindsets.
In Escaping Utopia, much of the book obviously is focused on the people and their stories, the cult survivors, and we really don't get too much of a glimpse into your experiences with the New Age healing cult.
No.
If you don't mind, I'd like to fill in some of the gaps, as much, of course, as you'd like to share. How did you get involved? Were you born into the cult or raised from an early age?
Raised from an early age. My mother was very ill and was heading for a wheelchair, and she found yoga. I don't know how, but getting it stretched out properly really helped her, and the breathing exercises helped her down regulate a lot of anxiety that she was having, and she just sort of found this new life for herself. So I call yoga the gateway drug, because then we became, health food store people. This was in the late 60s, early 70s. And then we became vegetarians. And then, it just kept snowballing from there, right? And we lived in I still do, in Northern California, where this is where kind of the New Age explosion happened in the 60s and 70s. So you sort of couldn't grow up here and not get hit by some shrapnel of this explosion. And we were in the middle of it. I don't know how she met the man who ran our cult, but he was a channel, and that means that he was purportedly giving his body over for another long dead person to speak through. That's what the concept of channeling is. And it was just so exciting. It was so exciting. And the things that we learned and the things that we were being exposed to about reincarnation and healing and energy, and we had all been reincarnated in this lifetime to do something special for the world. And we had been together in Egypt and Camelot, which I don't think exists, but that's not an important part of the story, right?
Who cares about myths? Nobody does.
Yes, we were in. We were also in Atlantis, the imaginary island.
Oh, that sounds nice.
Yeah, it was nice on Atlantis, and it was just this wonderful utopian group. It was wonderful. So we joined that when I was 10, and I grew up from that moment sort of surrounded by people who loved me, but also were, so excited that I could be exposed to these ideas at such a young age when they had to, not learn what they learned and get rid of old ideas so they could upload all of our group's ideas. And so it was just a brilliant place early on, as many of these groups are, right? You can really understand why people joined. As they get older and more culty, you sort of stand on the outside and think, why did you go into that? Everybody knows that Scientology is not a healthy place. But when it started out, it was probably just amazing.
And for you, that question doesn't really apply because you were brought in at a young age, like the other ones talked about in the book. At any point, although you're young and you're young, did you ever say to yourself, "Wow, I'm in a cult right now," or that was really something that you couldn't know until the hindsight?
Oh no, and I was remembering one of our group's main ideas was that we're in a pre-cataclysmic time. Now, this is a huge ideology that spans, all countries and all centuries, but that we were getting prepared for the cataclysm, which was going to happen in 2004 or 2005. Spoiler alert, it did not happen, right?
Yeah, who would have thought? And this is, in the 60s, right?
Yeah.
So this is 50 years in preparation of this
we
supposed...
were prepared, my friend. Yeah, we had our bottled water way before anybody else did. But I remember thinking about the cataclysm and thinking, it didn't seem like, I didn't think it was going to happen. So there was a part of me that always was kind of stubborn, right? Now, when I was 17 and we had all moved, we went from being a group of people all over the world who would meet by, sometimes in person at the leader's house in San Francisco or wherever he was. And then he would make tapes, and those tapes would go out to everybody. So we were connected by cassette tapes and proximity. And by the time I was 17, we had all moved down to Southern California, and we were going to start a business based on our right livelihood and all the spiritual energy stuff that we could do. And it was going to be this brilliant thing. But it wasn't. That was the time when the cult energy really started to take on a lot of steam. And the control, the systems of control that Janja talks about, the systems of influence, and we already had the transcendent belief system, but now our leader was edging into the unhealthy, charismatic authority territory. We were in a meeting one night, and I think it was 1978, and the news had just come out about Jonestown. And as you may remember, in Jonestown, the people in the cult there were invited to or forced to drink cyanide in some kind of it wasn't Kool-Aid. Everyone says Kool-Aid, but it was some
like the competitive, I guess, of Kool-Aid.
It was like downscale, off-brand Kool-Aid.
Yeah, which I'm sure Kool-Aid loves, obviously.
Yeah. But what they don't say is that a number of people were shot who were not wanting to drink it, were shot. And so I think, what was it, 800, 900 people, including Congressman Leo Ryan, and it was just carnage. It was horror. And we were in we were in a group that night, and of course we all sent white light to everybody because that's what we did. That was our healing gesture, was to send white light.
And just so we know, at this point, how long have you been in the cult?
7 years, 7 or 8 years. Okay. And we had coalesced into a cultic group at that point. But Jonestown gave us the idea that we could not possibly be a cult because 900 people had not died, right? Jonestown set the bar so high for horror that I've seen, not just cults, but as I like to call them, and this is a technical term, culty cults, who can say to themselves, we're not a cult, nobody has died here. And so I think that for me was Jonestown was, a horror for everyone involved in it. It was just, an unrelenting catastrophe, but it's also been a catastrophe for anybody in a cult who's looking around and saying, something doesn't feel right here. And then everybody else can say, nobody has died. Nobody, there's no Kool-Aid here. So that was all that we knew about cults. Right? It wasn't clear yet about the more famous cults that we're aware of today. That was our first exposure to cults, and that was nothing like us, right? Come on, be serious. So we were protected from knowing that we were a cult by what happened at Jonestown.
It's interesting that it kind of helped you, not helped you, but it pulled you in the other way, thinking, oh no, we're not in a cult, because it kind of set the bar. Or up until that point, were you thinking, oh, wait, there's some issues that are going on?
I saw it. Even at 17, I saw it. And unlike the children in Escaping Utopia, who primarily escaped, they kicked me out. And because I had been, at this point, I was working in the kitchen, and because we were in a New Age healing cult, of course, I made, just absurd, bizarre meals with, alkaline balance and magic. We weren't vegans, but it was just as annoying as veganism. Everything had to be just perfect, and the herbs and the this and the food needed to be with special magic water. It was just incredibly hard work, but I didn't see it that way because it was normal for us. But I would wear clothes that I could get dirty while I was, making food for 60, sometimes 120 people. And there started to be a dress code for women. It was very sexist. You had to wear dresses of a certain length, and you couldn't wear pants. And I was like, are you kidding me? Just be real. So I refused, and that started a kind of a groundswell against me. It became a point. We were having difficulties, and because part of the New Age belief system is that you control the world through your thought forms, because we were having difficulties, everyone was on the lookout for someone whose thought forms were wrong, right? Who's having negative thoughts? It didn't occur to anybody that, no, our business ideas were just absurd and unlivable, and they were never going to go anywhere. It was all about people's negative thoughts. So they were looking at me really closely because I was so openly, unwilling to play that game. And it got to the point where I couldn't go out without a chaperone. And I would go shopping for, the ginormous amounts of vegetables that I would get at the local Vons or whatever. And I was 17. I was talking to the bag boy. I was talking to the cashier. I was just very, I had a lot of energy. I had a lot of interest in people. And at one of the meetings, one of the senior women brought up someone who was speaking in a flirty and unfeminine way to outsiders. And I just got up and I said, are you talking about me? Are you talking about me talking to Jesse at the Vons? And I thought everyone would, these people had known me since I was 10. I thought everybody would get behind me. And as I looked around, people's eyes were going down, and they had decided that I was a perfect black sheep.
To me, it sounds like you're the perfect teenager.
Yeah, I mean, what?
What about your parents? Where were they? What were they saying?
They were not there. They were not there. My mom and dad had split up when I was 11, and they had. My mom went on to find herself. So she was traveling around America from healing center to healing center. And my dad was living kind of a golf and tennis life in the Bay Area. So I would say both of them were pretty, it was the me generation, right? They were finding themselves and losing their children. So I was on my own.
Wow. So your parents brought you into the cult and then left you with the cult?
Well, my mom did. My dad was never a part of it. He thought it was absurd. And that was part of the reason that they divorced.
I mean, looking back, do you have fond memories of your childhood, or not really, because of obviously these the terrible things that parents did, I guess.
I understand them. I mean, it was the 70s. Everybody was getting divorced. All women were trying to find themselves. My mom was, of that generation. My dad had raised 5 kids coming out of Korea. He wanted to go have his golf and tennis life. I mean, I understood it even then, but it did leave me alone, But, I just, it just was what was happening. And so now I look back and I'm like, Mom and Dad, what in the hell were you doing? That was absurd. I was hitchhiking from San Francisco to LA when I was 16. What? You guys couldn't give me a bus ticket? What's going on?
Yeah, I guess there comes to a point, when you get older, I think for most people, obviously your experience is very different. You say, my parents, they did the best they could, with what they did. But in your circumstance, I mean, that just doesn't apply. It just seems like, I don't know.
But see, my mom didn't think of me going down there as her leaving me. This was like a second family, She knew that they would take care of me.
And up until the point that you started acting out, in their eyes, did you feel that way, that they were welcoming you, that you were part of the family?
Oh yeah, I was their baby. I was their beloved baby, and that's why it was just so shocking when everyone turned away from me in that meeting, and I was a sacrificial lamb, and I mean, I was a good person to sacrifice because the leader of the group, and my mom were close. And so he was kind of like a second father to me. He was away when this happened. He was out, I think he was in Europe trying to gather more money for our failing businesses. And with him out of the way, they could isolate me. So I learned a lot about sociology at the age of 17.
And that was common thread throughout the stories in the book that if there was a charismatic leader who happened to be away, their inner circle would take that power in that moment, and sometimes a few of the people that I talk about being kicked out in a similar circumstance.
Yeah. I was thinking if he had been there, he would have stepped in. He wasn't, and we didn't have cell phones then, so it was too bad for me.
Before we were talking about different ways that cults manipulate each other, and some of the people from participants in the book, the cult survivors, they talked about, and because they were raised as a child, that they went through like some type of indoctrination program. You went through something like that, or at least how are the ways were you manipulated?
For us, with the belief system, it was so exciting that I think that's something that that smart groups do, is make the belief system so exciting that people begin to self-monitor, right? So it's sort of the systems of control showed up once we got to that, once we all got together and that business was started. And then it was all, this is your dress code, and this is who you can have sex with and who you can't. And this is, everything about our lives was controlled. But before then, the belief system was let me think. Kind of in the way that Catholicism implants an idea that you've got this God person who's looking over everything you do and keeping score, kind of like Santa, so that you internalize the idea that you are being watched and judged, and that there are things you can do, like going to confession, to get right with this being. It had that same kind of flavor, though we weren't Christian at all, that we had karma that was, a part of every moment we were living, that we had reincarnated, and that there was a meaning and a purpose to our lives that we were being held to. And the leader was channeling, a ancient Chinese sage who would tell us what our purpose was, right? And we were very excited about it. So anything that we did that pulled us away from that vision, or cleaning up our karma, or living to our destiny, was, if we were going to stay in the group, we were managing ourselves. And we were a lot more effective at managing ourselves than anybody on the outside would have been. And I think that's one of the genius parts of a belief system like that. That it's almost like you're engaged in it, and it's engaged in you. You develop a relationship with it. It's a transcendent belief system. It is totalistic. There's no other right one. Other people are fooling themselves, and we're the chosen people. So I think that was brilliant.
What about the leader? Do you think he manipulated you specifically in any way, or was really just the belief system kind of keeping you within itself?
Yeah, the belief system itself was the manipulating force, right? That and all the stuff about eating perfectly, and yeah, there was a lot of, it didn't feel like indoctrination in the way that perhaps Janja had her indoctrination in her Marxist group, where they would actually indoctrinate you. They would sit around and criticize you for 4 hours in a room. It wasn't like that. It was much more subtle and much more a part of the systems of social engagement. Everybody was excited about the new diet. Everybody was excited about the new idea. And, things moved like wildfire through us as a group, and created this incredible cohesion that none of us wanted to break. None of us wanted to step out of it.
Unlike a lot of the stories in the book, you probably didn't see some of the more violent and horrible acts, like child. Well, I guess maybe not child neglect, because it sounds like there was child neglect there for you, but rape and forced prostitution, and imprisonment. That wasn't like anything that you were witnessing.
No, we were a pretty tame cult. Right.
That sounds like a good thing.
It's a good cult to be in. If you're going to be in a cult, choose one that's where people are kind, because there's this karma thing hanging over everybody, and we knew that if we misbehaved, we were setting ourselves up for a world of pain. So,
do you still feel that though? Is that something that you still believe?
No, but I'd like it to be true. When people are really being really horrible, I was like, gee, I wish karma was a thing.
If only. What about any of the beliefs? Did you take any of them still with you, that still kind of ring true to you today?
Not today, but for a long time after that, because I had, it was such an exciting group of beliefs. And it was sort of a pick and pull lot of the soul in terms of New Age beliefs that we were being exposed to. Our leader, I found out later by doing my research, he was pulling a lot from Edgar Cayce, who was the first kind of famous channel. Edgar Cayce was called the Sleeping Prophet. Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so he would go to sleep or go into a trance, and he would channel someone who had all this information about health. So our group was, unbeknownst to me, and also a lot of the dietary stuff was basically Edgar Cayce Part 2 without attributing Edgar Cayce.
So you don't think he actually had the channeling skill?
I don't think anybody does.
Well, that was my next question. I mean, because they were talking about going back to Jonestown. I was reading something where, there was someone who was a member who escaped, one of the few, I guess, that escaped, but he was like a scientist. And he was saying that, because supposedly Jim Jones he would say that he had like the skill to heal people just by touching them. And 40 years later, he still believed that, even a man of education.
Oh, wow.
So okay, so you still don't believe that because it just goes to show you the hold that some of the these people can have over you even years later with education.
Well, yeah, and it's certainly something we would want to believe. There's that whole cognitive dissonance and motivated reasoning that if people want to believe something, they'll do as much as they can to slap away all disconfirming evidence. Right. And but I spent a lot of time in the New Age trying to make what was beautiful in our cult work, in a not cultic way. So I had a whole career going, being a psychic healer of sorts, and I wrote a lot of books and did a lot of traveling and public appearances, but I kept researching things that I knew to be untrue within the New Age. I was sort of there in the New Age saying, okay, so there's some beautiful stuff in the middle of it, and there's a lot of garbage and nonsense and abuse and horror, but let's keep what's good. And I realized after being there for as long as I was that there wasn't anything to keep at all. And so I did a murder-suicide on my on my career, pulled everything I controlled out of print, and just went dark, and went back to school to get a degree in social science, and that's where I met Tony Waters and Janja Lalich.
Was there a specific instance or event that precipitated that? Why this sudden, I can't do this anymore?
9/11. It was 9/11, and I just looked at what an enduring horror spiritual beliefs are. And everyone will say, no, those were the bad people, and no, there's really something good in spiritual beliefs. And I said, you know what, I can't be involved in anything like this until I make up my mind. I'm done. I am done. And looking into the beliefs in the New Age that I knew to be nonsense, I finally ended up in the area of the skeptical community. And I did not stay there very long because it's a very, very troubled community. But they are the only people who are questioning and challenging New Age ideas. They're doing it in a way that is very off-putting, and it's it can't work. But the information there is very good. So I was able to finally see that the things that I had been saying and the things that I had been supporting, even though I had a very good intention behind it, were helping people to think less and question less and take things at face value that should have been questioned. So I shut everything down.
Sounds like you were kind of falling under the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You didn't sound like you were doing anything intentionally bad, malicious, or negative, but realizing that I commend you for that. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll have more of Carla McLaren's story. This is The Mind's Eye. We'll be right back. The Mind's Eye returns with Carla McLaren, co-author of the recent book Escaping Utopia: Growing Up in a Cult, Getting Out, and Starting Over. Let's focus on Carla's part of the story where she gets out and starts over. Now, we talked a little bit before about why you were kicked out. You were breaking some of the rules. You were speaking your mind. And even at the time, you knew that it was you were probably starting to realize it was a toxic environment. So, you're kicked out. And this is, you started there at the age of 10, I believe you said earlier. What did you do? How did you make your way pretty much like in an alien world? Where did you go? Who did you go for support?
My sisters were down in that group, and they weren't kicked out, and I was able to stay with them. I wasn't allowed to talk about group information, so they were still parts of the group, but I was able to stay with them. And I eventually made my way up to San Francisco somehow and spent a number of years just sort of floating um, from job to job, from idea to idea. And, I had periods of homelessness. And it took me until I was, I think, 27 or 28 to go and get myself into community college so that I could, start getting into the real world. I had started writing at that time, but I was, just a freelance writer, and I knew that I needed more education. So I just finished my master's degree in, I think, 2012 or 2013. So it has been, go to school, do 2 years, live for 10 years, go to school, do another 2 years. And that has been a situation of some grief for me because I really did belong in academia, but I was too late because this cult experience took away so much of my life. It took away so much of my young life. I learned a lot there, but I was going to learn a lot anywhere. It would have been better if I were learning in a place of learning rather than in this underworld kind of a situation.
How long were you in the cult for, and how long did it take you to, I guess, kind of put yourself together in your eyes?
I would say I was in the cult for 7 years. And it took another 10 years for me to stabilize. It took another 5 years for me to so 15 years for me to get into a life that was stable and made some kind of sense.
One of the ways that the cult controls members is hammering a distrust of outsiders. Was that something that you felt, or not really, or was that not something that they really did to manipulate you at all, or really just because it was more of a communal thing that wasn't really a sentiment that you had?
No, we had it because there was that, it's still happening in the New Age today where you don't want to be around negative people. Or people with negative energy or negative thoughts. So anybody who questioned us was obviously negative. And so if concerned family members were like, why are you giving these people up? Why did you move to Southern California? Like a normal person would ask. Within the context of our group, those people were negative. Those people were going to tear down our vision. They were going to stop us from being able to create these wonderful businesses. And so we were separated from our family members who could have helped, right? Under the guise of creating this wonderful community. And that's one of the first things now that I see. If a community is exclusionary, I'm like, nope, not involved, not interested.
So you never got mixed, you never really got mixed up back into a cult, because some talked about how in the book that they almost got involved back into another cult.
Yeah, I mean, and that's easy to do. I think if a person escapes, let me think. If a person escapes, depending on the age, and all they knew was a cult, then I think they might have a tendency toward joining another high control group, or something like that. Being thrown out, I don't know. I mean, I did see cults throughout. I see them now, but I think I was sort of inoculated against them. I think maybe that was a very helpful thing that happened.
So what was it like right after you got kicked out? It must have been a roller coaster ride emotionally. Were you just so happy to be free? Or, I mean, what was it like re-entering society? What were your emotions?
Oh, no, there was no happiness I didn't feel free at all. Just lots of recrimination, lots of anger, confusion. Does this mean that I don't get to have any kind of magical or meaningful life from here on out? being upset about the people who I thought were misbehaving more than I had, but who were still there. Yeah, no, it was like the loss of, well, it was like the loss of a family. They were my family. And, they showed me that their ideology was 1,000 times more important than I was. So, yeah, it was a huge wound. And it, yeah, it was a huge betrayal.
What about when you were just starting, re-entering society? Was there anything memorable or something that just completely surprised you about society in itself?
No, for me, I had already lived in the world. We didn't live together until, that year before they threw me out. So I had not been living in a closed world like so many of the people in Escaping Utopia. I had gone to real schools. I had had jobs, so I knew the world. And I had a checking account. I knew how to run things. I knew how to apply for jobs. A lot of the kids who came out of Escaping Utopia had no skills whatsoever, and their leaving was so heroic. I looked at my situation. I thought, that was nothing.
Well,
It was
I don't know if I'd
horrifying.
say nothing, but
Yeah, but yeah, that was nothing. Yeah, or Janja's situation where she, came in her, I think she was in her 30s, and lost so many years of her, really important adult life. So many years when she could have been building her career and earning money and, setting aside money and support for retirement, and instead she's left with nothing. And she's tired and she's like emotionally beat up. I think I was lucky that I was younger and I was resilient.
does the cult still exist that you were in?
No, they fell apart about a year after they kicked me out. And
Coincidence? I think not.
coincidence, I think not. I just say to people, if you're going to be mean to me, just wait a year. No,
And you're telling me you don't believe in karma?
I don't believe in karma, but it's still funny. No, but the leader did continue. I think he wrote books, and I think he kept finding new ways to create new groups. And I think he's still alive, but he never reached that level of acclaim again. What's interesting is that a number of the people he taught then took on his shtick and went out and became famous behind it. So I was
You
really
gonna name names or
Stuart Wilde. He's dead now. I mean, I went into a New Age bookshop and I saw Stuart's face and I just laughed out loud because he was a complete scamp. I mean, he was just, oh my God, he was such a scalawag and a pirate and I thought, what in the world is he doing on a book? And it turned out, he had created this whole cult of personality around himself. And I went, okay. So he saw what our leader had not been able to do, and he figured out how to fix that. Wow.
And before you talked about how when you left that some of the people that you got help from were I think your sisters or your mother's sisters. Do you still talk to anybody? Do you still talk to them or to anybody from the cult at all?
No. No, not anybody except my sisters. And none of us really talk about it. It's just not a thing.
I get that. Did you ever talk? And I hate to bring up all this negative stuff, and I really apologize, and I really appreciate you sharing.
Don't have negative energy. You're going to ruin my business.
I'm so sorry. I really apologize, but
I'm okay with negative energy.
I know you've talked about it a lot, but I can't imagine it gets that much easier every time. Maybe a little bit, but I really appreciate it. But with your parents, did you ever end up seeing them again at all, or no?
Oh yeah. I took care of my mom for the last 20 years of her life, and my dad died last year, and I took care of him while he was dying. So no, I don't hold grudges. I just, I tend to just understand it. I mean, people really let me down, but they didn't have the skills to do it any differently. And my hope for any of them is that they just got skilled up and became better human beings.
I mean, you've really turned your negative experiences into a positive experience, and I think that is something that's really big about the book. At the end, that's I think what you want a lot of the cult survivors and people reading it to see is that it's not the end, but it can be a beginning for some, for many.
Yeah, and I like the book has so many stories of people and just story after story of people figuring it out, getting it out, being in a lot of pain, being confused, and then moving forward. And I like turning back and writing this book and sharing these stories in the hopes that maybe someone like me, who's 17 and gets kicked out or even is trapped in, will find it and see that there's a better life waiting.
What advice or specific advice would you give to a young person thinking about leaving a group that he or she was born or raised in?
Yeah, get support. Get as much support as you can, and you can gather it secretly wherever you can. Janja has a book. This is the book that I helped re-edit. It's called Take Back Your Life, and it's just sort of like the yellow pages of getting out of a cult or an abusive relationship, how you take care of yourself, what kinds of things you might need in terms of mental health support when you've been in a high control group like this. Take Back Your Life is really helpful. And in Escaping Utopia, we talk about some of it and then just send people to books or websites. Another thing that's really helpful is if you can, find a group of whoever you are, ex-Scientologists, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, Enron employees, anybody who knows the specifics of what you went through. They are all over Facebook. There's listservs and things like that. There's groups everywhere of people who left the situations that you're in. So we're out there waiting to grab you and hug you when you get out and help you.
You can put me on that list too. I'm always ready to give hugs away for anyone.
Yeah.
One of the cult survivors, I think it was Joseph, he talked about wanting to open a sanctuary for other survivors. Why doesn't something like that exist?
Well, it does. There are many different sanctuaries for many different cults. I think there's one in there. Oh, who is it? The Family, that horrific child sex cult. Yeah.
Oh, God, that was terrible.
You want to just poke your eyes out. There are family, I don't want to say group homes because that sounds like a cult, but places for people escaping from the family. There's places for people escaping from transcendental meditation. I know that you can take courses in transcendental meditation and never get involved with the mothership, but the mothership is a cult. And so there are people on the outside waiting to help people to heal from that situation.
From what I was reading about your background, and I hope I don't pronounce this wrong or butcher the word because the time I came across it, you're an agnotologist. So tell us what that is and kind of how you view cults through that prism.
Agnotology is the study of the production of ignorance. And I love it so much. Yeah, there's a whole lot of that. So one of the people who is studying agnotology is down at Stanford, and I tried to get in, but I couldn't make it in. I was too old, and I had gone only to state schools because that's what I could afford. But I love this concept of educating people in a lack of information or a lack of truth. So you see things like
what about the media portrayal of cults?
The way that the media portrays cults is going to it's sort of like with Jonestown and our cult, right? We can't be a cult because nobody died here. I really love Janja's bounded choice model because she shows that a cult can be anything. It can be a business. It can be a relationship between two people. That we have experience of cultic relationships and cultic groups all around us, but because the media does such a piss poor job of talking about a cult as a normal human group that has done something abnormal in terms of how those four dimensions of bounded choice are being utilized. Something that was interesting to me in reading Escaping Utopia and working on the bounded choice model is that in our group, in my cult, we were never going to be successful because our leader was not he was not a toxic narcissist. He was just a regular old egocentric guy. And he was never going to be able to pull together people in the way that someone like Jim Jones or L. Ron Hubbard did. He didn't have that wild-eyed lack of care for people. He was always too decent a person to make a real cult happen. And I think that is a wonderful failure of his. So thank you for failing.
What do you think that is that makes that transition from someone, like your leader to then becoming a toxic leader who just, absolute power corrupts absolutely?
Mm-hmm. Some people say, and Janja might say, that the person probably has a personality disorder going into it. If they don't have a personality disorder, the whole mechanisms of being the adored one can start a personality disorder brewing. So cults can be created by the psychological disorder of the leader, but a cult can also disorder their leader, because adoration is I'm just seeing right now adoration is a form of violence. Because I'm treating the other person and myself as more than or less than human. So that can lead to an inflated ego and a lack of groundedness, and it can start a kind of mental illness running in the person because they no longer have checks and balances on their behavior.
Did you ever feel like you were stigmatized because you were in a cult, or that was something you never felt had an effect?
For me, no. People think, what? They're interested in it. What? Tell me about a cult, Yeah.
You have such a positive attitude. You ever seen, I've never watched this, but apparently I guess the Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt?
Yes.
But she has but I've seen something. She just has a very positive attitude. I guess she was in a cult formerly.
Yeah.
And I mean that respectfully, of course.
That's silly, but yeah. But yeah. I mean, there's a thing about cults is, and Janja points this out, that cults are not filled with wild-eyed, kooky people. They're filled with idealists, people who want to save the world, people who want to have a higher calling. And so cult people can be some of the best people. And I think that's why we so much want people to understand cults, is that if you have that kind of idealism and dedication and intelligence, you need to make sure that you are being utilized by people who have ethics and grounding and morals, and they are not going to hurt you or take advantage of you. I think a lot of people who are idealistic would also tend not to have like bullshit alarms. They would be like, okay, I'm here to help. I'm here to do this. So people who are in cults, I don't see them as, broken waifs, desperate to be retrained, but instead idealistic people who were abused.
And you're proof that you can, recover from those and be successful from such traumatic experiences.
Yeah.
If someone wants to get some, advice from you in person, or just talk to you, or just, see you at an event, because I know you're doing a few of those coming up, where can they get some information?
I think probably my Facebook page is the best place right now. I'm writing. I'm on a number of deadlines now, so I'm not doing anything publicly at this point.
What are you working on books wise? What can we expect in the near future?
Well, they're back to the emotions and empathy. I'm working on a book on anxiety called Embracing Anxiety. That's the working title. And another book on the workplace, how the workplace can, this is the working title, but I don't think it's going to happen, how the workplace can suck less. So,
Sign me up. I like it. Works for me. That'll grab you, to say the least.
that's a grabby title.
It definitely is, and I think most people are yearning for something like that right now, for sure. Would you say that your experience in the cults guides your book? Because I know you also did, as we said before, The Art of Empathy. You said it's part of this series. Does that guide your writing at all when it comes to these style books?
Yeah, especially the workplace book. Now, Language of Emotions was about individuals and their own emotions. Art of Empathy was about people in relationships. And now the workplace book is about social groups and how they can go awry and how their social behaviors can make a workplace just a gruesome place to be, and how to change that. So that's our new book. A cult survivor tells you how to have a healthy group. That would be awesome.
Works for me. I'll take any advice from where I can get it, quite frankly. But we'll definitely have you on when that comes out, whenever that may be, whenever you got to hit that deadline. So, but I just want to say, Carla, thank you so much for sharing. I know it wasn't easy for you, but I really appreciate it, and I think the listeners appreciated it too.
Thank you very much.
All right, we'll be back with the Mind's Eye wrap-up when we return. Time for the Mind's Eye wrap-up. Unfortunately, Janja won't be able to join us on this episode. Hopefully, we can turn this into a two-parter and return next week. If not, onward ho we go, as always, 2 weeks from now on the 31st, when we explore The Curse of Oak Island, the story of the world's longest treasure hunt. We'll talk to longtime Rolling Stone contributing editor and journalist Randall Sullivan about the curious history of Oak Island and the generations of individuals who have tried and failed to unlock its secrets. Should be a great one. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. Until the next one, be well and let well be. DJ BJ Turnoff signing off for the Mind's Eye on Z Talk Radio and Stitcher Radio.